for instance, here is the end of the artery, so this is the abdominal aorta, which is then splitting into two common iliac arteries, which then split into two internals and two external iliac arteries. And then as you go further, it becomes a femoral artery. The blue are always going to be the veins, and so this is the inferior vena cava. There are going to also be some arteries and veins going into kidneys. As we go through the semester, we're going to have some other models, like the kidney model, and I don't know, the model of the chest with the lungs, and the model of the this abdominal cavity, where you're going to see some other arteries and veins, which can be used. Those models can be used for labeling arteries and veins. Hey, there's a heart that has a thymus on top of it, so you can see that. This is a beautiful heart that we already had. Didn't we have thymus on this one? I guess not. How about this heart? I like this one. All right, so heart is a pump made of muscle. There are slides here of the cardiac muscle you've already seen before. You can look at it again. And it's going to pump blood. And there are slides here of blood, which you've seen before, but you can look at it again because it can show up, right? The heart is a pump that in mammals is going to have two atria and two ventricles. Two atria and two ventricles. So this is sort of like this. So this is the right atrium, right ventricle. This is the left atrium and left ventricle. The atria are on top, they're smaller. The ventricles are on the bottom, they are bigger. Okay. The left side of the heart and the right side of the heart at any given time are going to have the identical volume of blood in them. Right? They're going to have exactly the same number of milliliters of blood inside of, let's say, left ventricle and right ventricle at any given time. It's always going to be the same. And yet, if you look carefully, and we will dissect the heart in a minute, you're going to see that the wall on the right side, the wall of the right ventricle, is much thinner than the wall of the left ventricle, which means that the left ventricle is much more powerful. It's going to pump that same volume of blood with much more pressure, which means that the pressure is going to be much stronger in the arteries coming out of it. And the artery coming out of the left ventricle is the aorta. It comes out here. This is the aorta. Aorta is going to take blood to everywhere except the lungs. Right ventricle, when it pumps, is going to pump into this is pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery is blue. Veins are usually blue. Why? Because in this model, what they are labeling red and blue is not arteries and veins. They are labeling oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. And pulmonary artery is going to split into two, the left and the right, and it's going to go into the two lobes of the lung. And it's going to break down into, smaller and smaller arteries, arterioles, and capillaries. And those capillaries are going to wind around the alveoli of the lung. Remember, alveoli are made of the simple squamous epithelium, and the walls of the capillaries are simple squamous epithelium. So very, very thin layers, and they are wet. So the gases can dissolve in water and then pass through those two membranes and then get into the bloodstream, or the other way around. So that's where the exchange of gases is going to happen. There's going to be oxygen going from the air into the blood, and carbon dioxide going from the blood into the air to be exhaled. So then that blood is going to collect from the capillaries into the smallest venules, to bigger and bigger and bigger veins, and they're going to collect into the pulmonary veins. Pulmonary veins are these little red things, right, coming from the right side and from the left side, and they are going to go into
Which ones again?
the little red things, right, and the little red things here. Those are pulmonary veins bringing the now oxygenated blood. That's why it's red on this model, right? Oxygenated blood into the left atrium. So it's going to like drip, 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 drip into the left atrium, and from the left atrium it's going to go into the left ventricle, drip, 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 drip in there, and then at some point this whole heart is going to contract. And the way it contracts downward in the atria and then upward in the ventricles. So this upward contraction of this ventricle is going to push the blood into the aorta, and from the aorta into the rest of the body, taking the oxygen to the rest of the body. And then it's going to return via inferior and superior vena cava, and it's going to, that's now deoxygenated blood because the tissues have taken the oxygen out. And it's going to put it into the right ventricle, right atrium. From there it's going to drip, drip, drip and fill the right ventricle. When the heart next contracts, it's going to push it into the pulmonary artery, back in the lung. We have made two cycles, two circles, one through the lung, that's pulmonary circulation, and one through the rest of the body, that's the systemic circulation. So can you guess why is the wall of the left ventricle so much thicker than the wall of the left ventricle? Any ideas? Any suggestions? Why not the same?
Because the left side need more, be stronger. for
Be
the-
stronger?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so it's going to make higher blood pressure, right? In order to push through a much more a
Area.
bigger area, larger amount of vessels, right? What would happen if the right side of the heart got built up so the wall is just as strong and thick as on the left? The really good question is, why is the right wall thin? It's not just that you don't need as much pressure, you don't want as much pressure. What would happen if the right side of the heart would push the blood with the same pressure? You would bleed into your alveoli, right? It would burst into the alveoli. It would be too much pressure. And so it's actually thinner on the right side in order to avoid that. On purpose, it's lower pressure. So it goes just slowly goes through this little lung and picks up oxygen and goes away. So the kind of the purpose why it is different is in order to not flood your alveoli with blood, so you don't bleed into your lungs. All right. Between these chambers, you see these white things and white things here, and there's a little bit here, should be. Those are valves. So when we talk about this in the lecture, we're going to talk in great detail. What the valves do is they prevent the blood from going backwards, right? So you have atria, which are relatively thin and weak, kind of pushing down the blood into the ventricles, but ventricles are much stronger. And when the heart contracts, it's going to hugely increase the pressure of the blood. And the liquid is always going to go from the area of high pressure to low pressure. Well, there are two places where it's lower pressure. One is the artery, like the aorta, and the other one is going back into the atrium, right? You don't want that, right? You don't want to go back to the atrium. Atrium is now empty, and it's, flappy little thin wall. It's very low pressure. It's easy for the blood to go there. So the muscle, when it contracts, it also pulls on these chordae tendinae, or heartstrings. Chordae tendinae are going to shut down the valve. So the